Welcome, dear listener. Take a deep breath. Let the noise of the day fade away as you settle into the calm of this story. Imagine yourself standing by the sea at twilight, where the air is cool and filled with the scent of salt and drifting mist. Tonight, we journey to a lonely lighthouse on the edge of the ocean, a place where time slows down, where the world feels still, and every sound is a whisper of peace. Let the story carry you there, gently, as your thoughts begin to drift. The lighthouse stood on a rocky cliff at the end of a winding coastal road. It had been there for more than 100 years, its white walls weathered by wind and sea spray. During the day, it gleamed like a beacon against the blue sky, but at twilight, it softened into shades of gold and rose, as if the setting sun brushed it with quiet affection. The keeper who lived there, an elderly man named Elias, loved this hour most of all. Twilight was when the world seemed to hold its breath. Not quite day, not yet night, suspended in a kind of magic. Elias had tended the lighthouse for over 40 years. His days followed the rhythm of the tides and the wind. Each morning, he polished the brass instruments, checked the oil, and wrote in the logbook that rested on his small wooden desk. In the evenings, he climbed the spiral staircase to light the great lamp, a steady flame that sent a beam far across the waves, guiding ships safely past the jagged rocks below. He had done it so many times that it had become a meditation, a ritual that calmed his mind. As the sun sank lower, Elias stepped outside, his boots crunching softly against the pebbles. The air was cool and smelled faintly of seaweed. Gulls floated on the breeze, their cries fading into the distance. Down below, the waves rolled in slow, rhythmic sighs against the shore. He could hear every sound clearly, the faint hum of the lantern's mechanism, the whisper of wind through the tall grass, the soft tapping of the flagpole rope against the metal rail. It was a symphony of quietness, every note perfectly in place. He leaned on the railing and looked out to sea. The horizon was a soft blur of lavender and silver. In the distance, the lights of a fishing boat twinkled faintly. The men aboard were finishing their work for the day, their laughter carrying faintly across the water. Elias smiled. Though he lived alone, he never felt lonely. The sea was his companion. The stars were his visitors. The steady rhythm of the waves was his music. He returned inside and climbed the staircase. The steps spiraled upward in graceful curves, their edges worn smooth by years of use. At the top, the lantern room waited, a circular chamber of glass and brass, filled with the quiet hum of machinery and the faint warmth of the lamp. Elias lit the flame with careful precision. The glass panels caught the light, and the great lens began to turn slowly, sending a beam sweeping across the twilight sea. It moved like a heartbeat, steady and patient. Once the lamp was burning brightly, Elias sat by the window with a cup of tea. He watched as the light traced its path across the waves. Sometimes, he imagined that the beam carried his thoughts, reaching far into the night, brushing against distant ships, reminding the sailors that someone was watching over them. Outside, the first stars appeared. The sea turned a deep, endless blue. The air grew cooler, carrying the distant call of a night bird. Elias felt the peace of it settle into his bones. He opened his logbook and began to write. The nib of his pen scratched softly across the paper, another familiar sound in the quiet evening. Twilight calm, he wrote, winds gentle, sea smooth, lantern lit. He paused, smiling faintly. Sometimes he added small notes, the flight of a bird, the color of the clouds, the shape of the moon. Over the years, his logbook had become a kind of diary, a record not just of weather and tides, but of moments that might otherwise have been forgotten. As he wrote, the light flickered faintly. A thin wisp of fog drifted in from the sea, brushing against the glass. Elias leaned closer, watching as the mist curled and danced in the lamplight. It was beautiful, like breath on a mirror, here for a moment and gone the next. He set his pen down and closed the book. The night was coming on now, softly and without hurry. The beam of the lighthouse continued its patient sweep, lighting up the fog like strands of silk. Far below, the tide whispered against the rocks. The world seemed to grow quieter still, as if waiting for sleep. Elias rested his head against the window pane. The glass was cool against his skin. He closed his eyes, listening. The wind sighed, the waves murmured, the lighthouse hummed, steady as a heartbeat. In that gentle soundscape, time seemed to dissolve. And for a moment, it felt as if the whole world was breathing in rhythm. The sea, the wind, the stars, and the solitary keeper who had given his life to the light. The night deepened slowly. The horizon faded until sea and sky became one vast shade of blue-gray. The stars above seemed to shimmer closer, their reflections trembling gently on the surface of the water. The beam from the lighthouse swept across the sea in a slow, graceful rhythm, like the movement of a giant pendulum, marking time that only the ocean could understand. Elias sat quietly by the window. The old chair beneath him creaked softly with each breath of wind that pressed against the glass. His cup of tea had gone cold, but he didn't mind. He liked the taste of it even when it was cool, the faint flavor of salt carried in by the air. He traced his finger along the rim of the cup, listening to the hum of the turning light above his head. Down below, the keeper's cottage was bathed in silver light. The moon had risen now, half-veiled behind a drifting cloud. It cast soft, dappled shadows across the path that led to the sea. A few lanterns flickered along the edge of the cliffs, marking the way down to the small dock. Sometimes Elias would walk there late at night when he couldn't sleep. The sound of the waves lapping against the wooden posts always soothed him. He decided to go now. He took his lantern, lit the wick, and stepped outside. The air was crisp and filled with the faint scent of seagrass. Each step crunched softly against the stones. The wind played gently with his coat, tugging at the edges. Above, the sky was vast and clear, the stars burning steady and bright. The sea shimmered like liquid glass, touched by the silver of the moonlight. As he walked, he thought of the many years he had spent here, the storms he had weathered, the ships he had seen pass safely through the channel, the long winter nights when the sea froze at the edges and the light seemed to glow brighter just to keep him company. Every stone, every sound, every scent had become part of him. The lighthouse was not just his home, it was his world. When he reached the dock, he paused. The wood was damp beneath his boots. The tide moved slowly, the waves rising and falling like a giant creature breathing in its sleep. Elias set his lantern down beside him and leaned against the railing. He closed his eyes and let the rhythm of the ocean wash over him. The sound was endless, a low, soothing murmur that seemed to echo from the heart of the earth. It reminded him of his childhood, of sitting by the shore with his father and listening to the same waves. His father had been a sailor, gone more often than home. When he was a boy, Elias used to watch the horizon for the tiny speck of his father's ship returning. He had learned to read the wind and the clouds, to know when a storm was coming. That knowledge had guided him all his life. He opened his eyes and looked out over the sea. The fog had returned, drifting in gentle ribbons across the water. The lighthouse beam cut through it like a blade of light, revealing glimpses of dark waves and faint silhouettes of distant rocks. The fog muffled every sound, wrapping the world in a cocoon of calm. Even the gulls had fallen silent. Only the soft wash of the tide remained. He smiled. "Good night, old friend," he whispered to the sea as if it could hear him. The words were lost in the mist, but somehow he felt that the ocean understood. It always did. Elias picked up his lantern and turned back toward the lighthouse. The path glowed faintly under the moonlight. His shadow stretched long behind him, swaying with each step. The sound of the waves followed him, softer now, like a lullaby. Inside, the warmth of the tower welcomed him. He set the lantern on the table and hung his coat to dry. The faint ticking of the clock filled the room, steady and comforting. The air smelled faintly of oil and salt and old wood. He poured himself another cup of tea and sat near the window once more. Outside, the beam of the lighthouse continued its slow rotation. Elias watched it move across the sea, then across the land, illuminating the cliffs and the grass before sweeping back out into the vastness of the ocean. Each turn felt like a heartbeat, patient, reliable, eternal. He took out a small, leather-bound book from the drawer. It wasn't the logbook, but a notebook of thoughts and memories. He opened it and began to read a passage he had written long ago. The light is not just for ships. It is for the soul. When you tend the light, you tend to the quiet places inside yourself. It keeps you awake when the world sleeps, and it reminds you that even in the darkest hour, there is something that still shines. He read those words and smiled faintly. They felt truer now than ever. The sea had taught him that everything moved in cycles. Light and darkness, calm and storm, arrival and departure. And through it all, the lighthouse stood, a constant reminder that even in isolation, there could be peace. The old clock struck midnight, its sound echoing softly up the spiral staircase. Elias yawned and leaned back in his chair. The rhythm of the waves grew slower in his mind, almost like a heartbeat lulling him towards sleep. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the faint hiss of the sea breeze through the cracks, to the soft hum of the lamp, to the stillness that wrapped the world. And there, in the quiet glow of the lighthouse, with the ocean whispering below and the stars shimmering above, he drifted gently toward dreams. Dreams made of water, wind, and light. Elias dreamed of the sea. In his sleep, the sound of the waves became a melody, slow and deep, rising and falling like a song only the ocean could sing. He walked along a beach of silver sand, where the water shimmered with starlight and the air glowed faintly, as if the night itself was alive. The lighthouse stood far behind him, its beams sweeping across the horizon in soft arcs of gold. It wasn't a warning light in this dream, but a guide, gentle, warm, and full of peace. He felt the sand beneath his feet, cool and smooth, and heard the whisper of the tide as it touched the shore. Each wave carried with it a memory. Laughter from long ago, the cry of seabirds at dawn, the sound of the first ship's horn he'd ever heard as a child. He walked on, listening, until the horizon opened before him like an endless path. In the dream, there was no time, only the soft, rhythmic movement of the sea. He felt lighter than air, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, between the past and the present. The stars above seemed to shimmer with recognition, as if they too remembered him from another life. Then, slowly, the dream faded. The soft sound of the ocean became real again, blending with the faint creak of wood and the gentle sigh of the wind outside the window. Elias opened his eyes. The room was dimly lit by the lantern, which flickered softly in the pre-dawn stillness. The first light of morning had not yet touched the horizon. It was the quietest hour of the night, the moment just before dawn, when everything holds its breath. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. His chair creaked beneath him. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of salt and damp stone. He could hear the waves below, slow and steady as a heartbeat. Everything was calm, so calm that it felt like the whole world was asleep. Elias rose and climbed the stairs to the lantern room once more. The metal of the handrail was cold beneath his fingers. At the top, the light turned slowly, casting soft reflections on the glass. He checked the wick, adjusted the flame, and made sure everything was working properly. Routine tasks, familiar motions, the rhythm of his life. But tonight, or rather this early morning, it felt different. The silence was deeper, and the stars seemed brighter. He opened one of the glass panes slightly, letting in the sea breeze. The air brushed against his face, carrying with it the faint cry of a distant gull. Below, the fog was beginning to thin. The waves shimmered faintly in the growing light. He could see the faint line of the horizon, dark against the lighter sky. There was something magical about this time, the slow awakening of the world, the first breath of the day. Elias leaned against the window frame and closed his eyes. The ocean murmured below, and he imagined the ships still far out at sea, their crews waking, their compasses steady, guided by the light he had tended through the night. When he was younger, he had often wondered what it would be like to live somewhere else, in a town, perhaps, or a city full of noise and people and color. But now, after decades by the sea, he couldn't imagine life without the sound of waves and wind. The lighthouse had become a part of him, a reflection of his inner stillness. The light he cared for was not just a beacon for ships, but a symbol of constancy. A small, steady flame in a world that never stopped changing. He thought of the countless sailors who had seen that light over the years. Some would pass in silence, others would send a brief signal of thanks. Most he would never meet, yet somehow that connection, silent, invisible, was enough. The light was his gift to them, and their safety was his reward. He watched as the first faint glow of dawn began to rise over the horizon. The sea turned pale silver, the color of pearls. The clouds caught the early light and blushed with soft pink and gold. The beam of the lighthouse began to fade against the brightening sky, its work for the night nearly done. Elias took a slow, deep breath. He could taste the morning in the air, fresh and cool, tinged with salt and possibility. Below, the gulls began to stir, their cries echoing across the cliffs. The world was waking, gently, and he felt a quiet joy rise within him. He extinguished the lamp with careful hands, covering the wick and turning the mechanism until the great light dimmed and went out. The sudden quiet felt sacred. The room filled with soft gray light as the sun's first rays reached the tower. Elias descended the staircase, each step echoing faintly in the silence. In the kitchen, he lit the stove and boiled water for tea. The kettle hissed softly, blending with the murmur of the sea outside. He poured the steaming water into a mug and sat by the window, watching the sunrise. The sky above the ocean had turned to gold. The water glittered like glass, waves rolling in smooth, rhythmic motions. The cliffs glowed in warm light. Everything seemed washed clean, renewed. Elias sipped his tea slowly, feeling the warmth spread through his hands. He thought of how many mornings like this he had seen, how many sunrises had come and gone while he tended this light. Each one was different, yet somehow always the same. The sea changed its colors, the clouds shifted their shapes, but the peace of the moment never left. He smiled faintly. Outside, the light of the lighthouse rested quietly now, its work complete until evening. The world moved in perfect balance. Night into day, light into rest, wave into wave. And in that still, golden morning, Elias felt something deep and calm within him. He wasn't just watching the ocean, he was part of it. The rhythm of the waves, the whisper of the wind, the slow turning of time. All of it moved through him like breath. He closed his eyes, listening. The world hummed softly around him. And for that brief, perfect moment, it felt as though the lighthouse itself was breathing, calm, alive, and eternal. As the morning unfolded, Elias stepped outside to greet the day. The wind was soft, moving gently through the tall grasses that lined the cliffs. The sky above stretched endlessly, pale blue at the horizon and deepening toward the zenith. The sound of the sea was quieter now, as if even the waves had grown sleepy after their long night of song. He walked slowly along the narrow path that circled the lighthouse. The stones were warm under his boots, touched by the early sunlight. Every few steps, he stopped to breathe in the scent of the sea, salt and mist, wildflowers and earth. The world felt fresh, clean, and alive. Far below, the water shimmered. He could see the faint trace of fish breaking the surface, flashes of silver beneath the waves. A distant sailboat moved across the horizon, its white sail gleaming like a small cloud drifting through the sunlight. Elias watched it for a while, listening to the rhythm of the sea. It was a quiet, meditative moment, the kind that slipped into the soul and stayed there wordless and deep. He made his way down to the rocks at the base of the cliff. The tide was low, and the stones were slick with seaweed. Tiny crabs scuttled away as he approached. Pools of clear water reflected the sky above, small mirrors of the greater world. He knelt beside one and traced a finger through it, watching the ripples spread outward. The water was cold, alive with movement. It reminded him, as it always did, that everything flowed. The waves, the tides, the wind, even the years. Nothing truly stayed still, and yet in that motion there was peace. Elias sat on one of the larger rocks and let his gaze wander over the horizon. The light of day had fully claimed the sky now, but the memory of twilight lingered in his mind, that soft hour when the world held its breath. He closed his eyes and listened. The ocean spoke in its endless language of waves and wind. Every sound was familiar. The deep pulse of the sea below the cliffs, the whisper of foam against the stones, the gentle hum of distant water meeting air. He felt the warmth of the sun on his face and smiled. It was enough. After a while, he returned to the lighthouse. Inside, the rooms were filled with light. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, glowing like tiny stars. The scent of tea and salt and oil lingered. Elias tidied his small table, straightened the logbooks, and polished the brass instruments one more time. The simple tasks gave rhythm to his day, like verses in a quiet song. On a small shelf near the window stood a row of seashells, smooth, spiral, and pearly. He picked one up, holding it to his ear. Inside, he could hear the faint rush of the sea. It was said that every shell remembers the sound of the ocean it came from. Elias liked to believe that was true. He set the shell back carefully and looked out the window. The ocean sparkled in the midday sun. The beam of the lighthouse was still now, resting until twilight called it awake again. Everything was at peace. As the day drifted onward, he sat at his desk and opened the logbook once more. The pages were filled with neat, steady handwriting. Years of tides, winds, and weather recorded in patient detail. But among those notes were other words, too, thoughts, reflections, and fragments of memory. He read one at random. The sea teaches patience. It never hurries, and yet it is never still. It moves through time without fear, carrying the world upon its breath. He smiled softly. The words felt true even after all these years, perhaps especially now. He took up his pen and added a new entry. Morning clear, sea calm, the light rests, all is well. He paused, then wrote one final note. I am grateful for the sea, for the silence, and for the endless turning of the light. When he set down the pen, a gentle breeze passed through the open window, carrying with it the faint cry of a gull and the scent of the ocean. Elias closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The sound of the waves rose and fell like a heartbeat, steady and sure. The afternoon passed in quiet harmony. The shadows grew longer, the air cooler. By the time the first hints of evening touched the sky, Elias had finished his supper and sat once more by the window. The sun was sinking, and the sea caught its reflection, gold fading to amber, then to violet and deep blue. The light that had rested all day began to stir again, waiting for him to wake it. He climbed the spiral staircase, each step familiar beneath his feet. At the top, he lit the lamp with careful hands. The great lens caught the flame and magnified it into brilliance, sending the beam sweeping once more across the gathering night. Outside, the sea glowed faintly in the light's path. The wind carried the distant murmur of waves against the rocks. The stars began to appear, one by one. Elias stood in the lantern room, watching as the beam turned slowly, out across the water, over the cliffs, back again. The rhythm was perfect. He could feel the pulse of the sea aligning with his own. The world was quiet, and the light was alive again. He smiled, content. Twilight had returned, soft and luminous, just as it always did. And with it came that gentle peace, the stillness between day and night, between sound and silence. He rested his hands on the railing and whispered softly, "Good night, old friend." The lighthouse hummed, the waves sighed, the stars shimmered above, and beneath the endless rhythm of sea and sky, the light continued to turn. A steady flame in the heart of the night, carrying warmth and safety to all who wandered beneath it. And as you listen now, with the soft sound of the waves around you and the calm voice of the night settling in your heart, let yourself drift, gently, easily, into the quiet sea of sleep. The light will watch over you, the waves will sing to you, and the world will rest, peaceful and still, until morning comes again. Good night.